Greetings. This is the second part of a two-part lesson on using the Modern Language Association Works Cited format. This presentation will be talking about articles, such as articles in books, articles, and how to do citations for web pages, and then do miscellaneous things you might find helpful as well. Probably the biggest change in the 8th edition in the 2016 of the MLA Handbook is that periodical entries are now following a pattern similar to other sources. This will make it all easier. So for articles in other works in periodicals, you start with the author. Now, news articles are often unsigned. Then the title of the piece, usually in quotation marks, and shorter works are published that way, followed by the bibliography of the periodical as noted already. After the date, there is a comma followed by the page numbers. Use P period for one page and double P period for multiple pages. PG is a movie rating, and you won't find that in formal bibliographies. For articles or other works in periodicals, you start with the author, as I said, and then the title of the piece, usually in quotation marks, followed by the bibliography of the periodical as noted. After the date, there is a comma followed by the page numbers. So here is an example. This is written by Nathaniel T. Jeanson, Human-Chip Genetic Similarity. Do shared mistakes prove common ancestry? That's the title of the article. Notice, since the title is a question, ends with a question mark, there's no need for a period. Then Acts and Facts is the title of the periodical, comma, volume number 40, issue number 9, just say number 9, comma, the date, in this case September 2011, and on page 6. One thing I do want to point out, doesn't happen a whole lot in bibliographies, but if you do have a quotation marks within quotation marks, you follow the standard punctuation of alternating single and double quotation marks. So mistakes in the original title is in quotation marks. So when you put the title in a bibliography, that word mistakes takes the single quotation marks. Here's another example. In this case, this is more than one page, but you can see the author, the title of the article, Restoring Desolate Heritages, the title of the periodical, the volume and number. In this case, it's a quarterly, so it's winter 2009, and then the page numbers. And even if they're just 2 pages, MLA always has a hyphen between multiple pages, so 56 through 59. Now, if the pages are not sequential, for example, if a story is continued on a page farther back, or if an article is interrupted by advertisements or other articles, so the reader has to skip a page, then just use the first page number followed by the plus sign. So, for example, here's an article in National Geographic magazine, 2002, Bob Dylan's hometown, Hibbing, Minnesota. Now, the story begins on page 134 and ends on 140, but there are several pages with advertising and no article text. So you may, if you want to, you could put down 134 to 136, 139 to 140 if you want to do something like that. But you may, in a case like this, just write 134 plus. So 134 plus additional pages following that. Now, some periodicals and websites carry untitled reviews or letters. In that case, the position where the title would normally go, simply write review of or letter, with the title and author or artist of the work being reviewed or the receiver of the letter being quoted. There are no quotation marks unless they're in the title of the work being reviewed. So, for example, this is a review by Vincent P. Anderson of a book entitled The Marriage of Emily Dickinson by William H. Scher. Okay, so there are no quotation marks. The only thing that's italicized is the title of the book being reviewed. And then, of course, the periodical, Christianity and Literature, of course, is italicized with the volume and number. In this case, the date is fall, and the page numbers in which it's found. And this works for reviews, for films, for theater performances, for art exhibits, for reviews of dances, concerts, anything like that. If it's a letter, then it would just be letter to whoever the letter was being written to. Or presumably the author of the letter would be the first entry. Now, if a piece is found in a collection, such as a literature anthology or a collection of poems, stories, or articles, then you begin with the author, if there are any, period, and the title in quotation marks or italics, depending on the length, period, followed by the bibliography of the book with the page numbers at the end. So here is Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God by Jonathan Edwards, as it appears in the Anthology of American Literature. And so we have the author, the title. This is a shorter work. It usually runs around, depending on the print size, somewhere between 10 and 40 pages. So put it in quotation marks. Then it's in the book, the Anthology of American Literature, with the editors, the volume number. In this case, it's a 2-volume set, publisher, etc. And then after the date of publication, you have the pages on which it is found. In this case, 319 to 330. Now, here is a similar one. Now, this is Romeo and Juliet, which is a full-length play, so that title would be italicized, and this is found in the freshman literature book, which we use at our schools, and so that's the particular edition, and you can see the title of the play, Romeo and Juliet, after the author, and then the publication information for the Prentice Hall Literature Gold 2nd edition, etc., and ending with the page numbers. Now, web pages, have to admit, every new edition of the MLA Handbook, there seems to be a different format for citing web pages. However, I will give the 8th edition credit because they are attempting to make the format similar to the other types of writings. Basically follows the same pattern as an article with the name of the website in italics, because the website really does kind of, if you think about it, correspond to a periodical. And this is followed by a comma and the date posted. And instead of the page numbers, you may include the URL if it is helpful. In some cases, it may be necessary to shorten the URL. And if you don't think it's going to be too much trouble for the reader to find it, you can drop the URL. If you do include the URL, you do not include expressions HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, www, or somebody just start with the part of the web address that distinguishes it from anything else. However, you do include DOI if you're referring to one of those kind of documents, because that is, God willing, a permanent address and will not change. Now, web pages are often edited or removed. It can be helpful to note when the page was accessed. And this is recommended, especially for news articles and blogs, which frequently get edited. Okay, so here's a pattern. As I said, follows the same pattern as an article in a periodical. In this case, the article is Why We Forget Most of the Books We Read, and it is found on the Get Pocket website. Notice it does have the date posted. We, in this case, have included the URL. There's a period after the URL, and then the date accessed, and that begins with a capital A because it's after a period. So accessed, in this case, 6 June 2019. Remember, all web pages are computer files, so they do have dates that they were created or posted. Usually these can be found easily. And again, don't rely on bibliography making applications for those. You have to read them to find out. In most cases, they're at the top or bottom of the page. Sometimes you might have to go into the source page to find it, but that tends to be exceptional. Also, many times web pages might not have the specific author's name on the page, but there'll be an About Us page or a contact page that will tell you the name of the author. Okay, here's another example. This, again, pretty simple ones in the article format. Page title is in quotation marks, just like an article. The website is in italics, like the periodical, followed by the URL. In some of the online citation machines, for some reason, they repeat the name of the website, or they may say, like, for example, they'll say English Plus and then EnglishPlus.com. And that's not really necessary. I mean, that's just being repetitive for no particular reason. If you include the URL, that's different, of course. Now, so that is basically what you would do for websites and material that you got from the internet. There are some other things, minor details that you might find helpful. For example, the original date of publication. For example, we had that Jonathan Edwards sermon earlier. It might be helpful to the reader to include the original date of publication was 1741. So we know it didn't come out in 2011. Here's one from the internet too. Praise of Folly is actually book length. That's why it's italicized rather than in quotation marks. But it is from a website from Gutenberg.org, and it included the original publication date, 1668. Notice 1668 is helpful, but it's also helpful to have the date posted, because if you just wrote 1668, reader might say, I don't think the internet was invented in 1668. I think there's something missing here. And then, of course, followed by the date accessed at the end. And then here is an example of a book with the original publication date. Again, that may be helpful to the reader. Like Ben-Hur or Huckleberry Finn or something have been reprinted many, many times. Occasionally you'll see brackets in a bibliography entry, and that means something that's not in the original work but is known to the writer. Sometimes it could be an unsigned letter, but we know who wrote the letter. It could be, for one reason or another, there was the publisher was left out, or something like that. Could be any number of things. This is an example. This book, Jesus Calling, was originally published in 2004 anonymously. The author didn't want to call attention to herself, so she didn't include it in the original edition. Now, later editions did include her name, so people found out that it was written by a woman named Sarah Young. But if you were referring to the first edition, you would put Sarah Young in brackets. So this reviews virtually all the material you would probably need for your research. You take this with the first slideshow on doing books. For specific of other types of media or special cases, please consult the MLA Handbook. It includes works of art, music, albums, interviews, letters, emails, films, other sources of information. And remember, each entry is alphabetized according to the most words except for a, an, and the. And the first line of each entry goes all the way to the left margin. Any subsequent lines are indented. This makes it easy for the reader to find any reference. The next page is a small sample Works Cited page. Excuse me, actually it's not quite. Alas, page 128, near the end of the MLA Handbook, tells us the format for such things as interviews, live presentations, and other media is not a settled matter. That's polite way of saying they're still discussing it. The page, though, does make some suggestions following the pattern of the practice template on 129. And the Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab, or Purdue OWL as it's usually called, does have some examples. Now, having said that, here's the format for interviews and works of art that Purdue OWL uses. And if you think about it, it follows the same pattern. So here's painting by Francisco Goya, family of Charles IV. 1800 tells the original date it was painted, where it is found, the Museo del Prado, Madrid, and then it would be followed by the bibliography of the publication or website that reproduced it. In most cases, unless you happen to visit the Prado and took a picture of it yourself. Okay, here's another one. If you say very simple, there's not much to it. Personal interview with Jane Smith. You know, in other words, the author, did this interview yourself. That would be all it would need to have. And here's a sample Works Cited page. This mostly has a couple of articles and mostly books, but you can see, notice it's alphabetized according to what is in the leftmost entry. So Sean Elder is the first one, and that's the article in National Geographic. You can see how that is done. Article in quotation marks, periodical italicized with the volume, with the number, with the date. In this case, it's monthly, so October 2002, and the page numbers. You might recall that using the plus sign just tells that the pages are not sequential. The next one is Homer. Homer doesn't have just has Homer, no last name or anything like that, or title or anything, just Homer. And in this case, we have the two translators following the title. The next one is the MLA Handbook. In this case, it's a corporate writer, and the corporation is the same as the publisher, so it begins with the title. The next one is just the very basic author, title, publisher, publication date, basic book entry. The next one is a book that was obtained on the internet from Gutenberg.org. Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. In this case, the original date of publication is helpful. In fact, with this one, it's particularly helpful because it went through several different editions. I think 1856, if I recall correctly, was the first one. That's the one they're using here. Notice it was posted February 2019. We have the URL for that and the date it was accessed. And then we have another work by Walt Whitman. And so notice in that case we use the 3 hyphens to show it's the same author. In this case, it's a shorter poem. It's not a book length like Leaves of Grass, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom, and that's found in an anthology, in a poetry collection. So we have the title of the book, so War Poetry, subtitled an anthology, the editor, publisher, and after the publication date, we would have the pages that the poem is found on. So, simple example, but hopefully this will give you a basic overview, and if you have any other questions, consult the MLA Handbook, and really does have a lot of material in there. Thank you very much.